Hello, everyone. This is John Appleman with Sedara. Welcome to the fourth in our series of webinars put on by Sedara to share information with all of our county CBOE clients. We're glad to have all of you on again this afternoon. Hope you're managing reasonably well through the pandemic, going off-site, some of you going back on-site. It's a trying time, but I think we're all managing through it. We'll take a quick look at the agenda today. And so most of the agenda is fairly standard. I'll recap the schedule around this. Matt, our SOC manager, will give you an update and recap recent activity with your group. Derek will come on and give an update from the latest ISAC meeting and also some of Sedara's top recommendations for being ready for an election. Clearly, the election being only about 3 months away.
Daniel Krebs, Monroe County.
Join the meeting.
The election being only about 3 months away at this point is very much top of mind, I'm sure, for you and certainly for us. And then the special feature of this afternoon session will be, as we said in the invitation, we'll open up the mics for all of you. And if you've got questions and topics that you'd like to have addressed, any information that you'd like to share with your peers, bring all of that forward, please. So the goals we set out for the webinars, you'll see aligns closely with the agenda. We want to share information from Sedara to the counties, and so Matt will do that. Also, tips, techniques, relevant information.
Courtney Kanafka.
Join the meeting.
Derek will cover all of that kind of information, and then the open mic will give you guys the opportunity to make sure we address all of your questions. You can put questions into the chat as we go along, but again, we'll make sure we reach the open mic portion this afternoon soon enough to have all of you contribute your questions, and we'll have back and forth dialogue if we need. So the participants at Sedara, just a quick recap. Most of you know me as the one who PM'd the rollout in your county. Matt, our SOC manager. Derek, Sedara's Chief Solutions Officer. And Dilip, our VP of Cyber Operations. I think you've heard all of us on previous webinars, and we'll have our contact information as usual at the end for follow-ups. The session is being recorded and will be available later as well. So with that, we'll have Matt jump in to the main content.
Hi everyone, this is Matt DeCenzo, the SOC manager at Sedara. I have a few things I wanted to discuss with you regarding the BOE engagement. The first is just a recap of the investigated and worked tickets. We worked 169 tickets for BOE since the last webinar. Had great communication back and forth with the counties involved, so thanks for that. Keep it up. If you guys need any updated IT contacts added or removed, just let us know. Most of the tickets that we see are related to account lockout and group membership change alarms, and I'm going to get into that a little deeper in a few minutes. But the first, I wanted to just have a quick refresh on what is involved in this engagement. Basically, we ingest and monitor the BOE department within your counties. Any non-BOE data from shared devices like domain controllers, firewalls, switches, things like that. are dropped before reaching logarithm. So I just wanted to give you guys a quick recap on that, since it's been a little bit since we rolled this out. The next point I wanted to make is we know you guys are likely making ongoing changes to your environment as our time working together progresses. I would ask that if the change may affect the services we are providing you, that you just let us know and we can work with you to ensure coverage remains in effect. You can always reach out to help@sedarasecurity.com to either ask questions or let us know if you guys are making changes, and we can coordinate with you guys. My last point I wanted to bring up ties back to the common alarms we see. I know it can seem unnecessary or overbearing when we open tickets for group membership changes or account lockout alarms, and it turns out to be that an IT staff member intentionally made the change or it was a user error. But there is good reason why we do these things. In regards to account lockouts, the real value behind the alarm is to determine if a brute force attempt against an account is occurring. If we can validate it was the user mistyping a password or a service had an old password cached, we can reasonably say there's no malicious intent. However, if these lockouts were to continue unknowingly to the user or the number of attempts is extremely high, we have better information to determine and stop malicious activity. So while it seems like a very basic, hey, is this happening? Was it a user error? Yes, okay. It can get repetitive, but there's good reason why we do these things. As for group membership changes, when an attack occurs, whether it be malicious or even during a pen test, which we do quite a few of, one of the first things an attacker will do is attempt privilege escalation. So if you look at the MITRE attack framework, privilege escalation is the fourth of 12 pieces to that framework. Part of that step can involve adding an already compromised account to a privileged group, allowing the attacker more access and controls, sometimes culminating in even becoming domain administrators. This additional access allows for more lateral movement by the attacker, allowing them to gain access to more and more pieces of your environment. So while it could be a menial change to a domain group and it looks normal, if we don't validate these things with you guys, it could be a malicious attacker succeeding in their objective. When we monitor for these changes, it can verify the legitimacy of the changes. We can better identify if it was malicious or not. So I just wanted to quickly run through that. I know you guys are probably seeing a lot of the same alarms over and over again, and there's good reason for it. So thank you.
All right, thanks for that, Matt. Hi everyone, this is Derek Kristich. As John mentioned, probably most of you have heard from me in the past. Just to reiterate, some of Matt's sentiments around some of these. We wanted to specifically bring these up because they are important, and as Matt mentioned, and some of the counties have brought up as well that they can seem repetitive, but there's a very, very good reason for them. And if you think through the attack scenarios and how an attacker actually tries to gain access and escalate privileges within an environment and move around, one of the first things they look to do is enable a secondary foothold, another way in. So when you think about the process, a lot of people think about executing attacks against vulnerabilities and customized tool sets and advanced tool sets, and all that's very true, but a lot of times it's only the very initial and beginning parts of attack. And once you get in, it's very much a matter of just moving around within the environment, just like an admin would. So at that point, if somebody's already inside, what we have to do is rely on behavioral analysis to look for these sorts of things. I'll give you an example from our red team. They did this recently, but we do it all the time. We're more recently able to and this is a larger commercial engagement. We're able to exploit a public-facing web server in a scenario where there was no DMZ or no network segmentation going on, able to create their own domain admin account and create their own VPN user account, as well as enable and enroll their own multi-factor authentication. So at that point, we don't need to exploit anything anymore. We can just log into their already provided VPN system, and we have domain admins to RDP to any server and do really whatever we want to without anybody really knowing. And those are the sorts of scenarios where antivirus and network intrusion detection become less effective or not effective at all, because we're not doing anything malicious anymore at that point. So, just wanted to kind of reiterate some of those scenarios. That's why we look for this stuff. And I know a lot of folks have brought up questions around why we highlight local admin accounts as well. And it's for the same reason. If you have a common local administrator password across an environment, a user can still, or an attacker can still move laterally within the environment with a local account. And if you're only looking for domain logs, then we wouldn't be catching that information. So that's another good reason that we actually collect all of the workstation as well as local server logs from that department, and it becomes important to highlight there, because the same scenarios all still apply. All right, so next we will just wanted to highlight a couple things from the EISAC. I think all of you, or many of you, should be familiar with EISAC. I know everyone's encouraged to participate. They put out a lot of great information. It was just last Thursday, they had their quarterly status call. And if you subscribe, you probably receive the regular PDF updates. And they do monthly ones as well. So a lot of fantastic information there. Wanted to highlight a handful of things that came out of last week's call, if you were there, and kind of as it relates to the SIEM services in this program. I don't want to recap everything, especially if everyone's already on that call. But also wanted to mention that the next call is on just in next week, is the quick monthly session. But one of the things I wanted to reiterate, and I know we've talked about in the past, is that the intel that EISAC, or ISAC in general, if you participate in the wider ones, that they provide and release, we are already taking that information and intelligence and putting it into the logarithm system for you guys to watch for this stuff. And this, varies depending on the type of intelligence, but typically you're looking for bad, known compromised IPs, bad IPs, especially if they're ones that have been around for a while, or targeted. Targeted groups are specifically associated with groups known to attack elections infrastructure. We are also putting in things like URLs as much as possible, known bad email domains, those sorts of things. So we're watching for all of that stuff. Now I know the types of logs we're collecting across the different counties vary a little bit depending on the technology that each county has. Everyone's got different firewalls, everyone's got different content filters and those sorts of things, and the quality of the logs and the content can change a little bit. So everyone's experience is a little bit different, but that's just wanted to highlight and reiterate that we are taking that intelligence and putting it into the system as often as possible. Another update from ISAC last week that I did want to reiterate, I think it's very, very useful for a couple of reasons, is the NCSR offering. This is the Nationwide Cybersecurity Review. This is not a new program. It's been around for a few years, but this year's one is starting on August 1st, so just a couple of weeks from now. So this is, if you haven't seen this before or in the past, this is intended to be a self-paced program for helping you to identify and create kind of a risk status and risk report for the county. It may overlap a little bit with some of the risk assessments that were done last year. But one of the really good things with this one is that it does map to the NIST framework, with which, if any of you have talked to us about the way we do certain things, we rely very heavily on the NIST framework, and it's a great program because it maps to HIPAA and PCI and a lot of the other compliance frameworks that a lot of you I'm sure have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So there's a lot of great resources as a part of that program. A secondary portion of that that's very, very important is the outcome of that program goes into a global status report that's is made available to participants of ISAC, including Congress. And that's an area that can, if you're leveraging it to really get a true risk assessment and adding statuses to that report, that's the sort of thing that's really going to help gain leverage and get the county's additional funding and help for these sorts of programs too, if we're really highlighting some of the needs there. So I would definitely encourage everyone to try and participate if possible. So one of the other pieces that is probably to nobody's surprise, going on the last several months is the significant uptick in COVID-related attacks. A lot of these are related to phishing. Some of this does go back to the fact of, we are any of this known spam domains and things like that we're adding into the system, but it's always good to kind of talk about these things and increase awareness where possible. So, the opportunities to prevent and protect against these sort of things will differ from county to county, but I would encourage everyone to, look at the tool sets that you have available in place and think about ways that we can do additional lockdown. For example, some spam filters will allow message contents or subject-based text filters. So we could just create a filter for the word COVID and apply all of that inbound email to a more stringent spam filter and rule. As a step further, if it's possible, which may be a lot more difficult, but would be to automatically quarantine everything related to COVID and make people pull it out of spam if there's something that they know is valid or they're looking for, which obviously will become a lot more challenging for certain departments. But at the same time, certain departments a lot of times are not dealing with these sorts of things publicly. It may not be as much of an issue. So as much as we can do to reduce the surface area around those sorts of inbound attacks, which again, it's just a tremendous uptick in phishing attempts related to those. So another one of the pretty significant pieces that's come up, or that ISAC covers, that many of you have probably seen in the past, is going to be related to identified vulnerabilities that have been made public and things you can do to block and stop them. If you haven't heard of it, and I'll just highlight a couple of these. These come out almost every single week, and that's why I encourage people to participate. But these are two of the really big ones that have come out recently. This F5 one was actually out several weeks ago, even before ISAC had published it, with this little snippet here, which is actually the exploit itself, or one of the versions of it. So if anyone's out there using F5 big IP appliances, there's a critical level vulnerability that allows for remote code execution, and it's quite simple to execute, which is why it makes it extremely, extremely important, especially depending on the architecture and how the F5s are deployed. I know there's a good chunk of F5s out there in the wild. These strings here, it's pretty easy to find these strings just about anywhere. This exploit itself, and you can see it's two commands. It's pretty straightforward to run this exploit. So there is a patch for this. If you can patch it immediately, that's certainly a big one. If you're not able to patch immediately, obviously, if it's significant, if there's downtime associated with that or change control that needs to be approved, this concept applies everywhere, not just to this one. You always look for ways to prevent these things without going too much, without, if you're not able to actually patch it or fix it, look for ways to mitigate it, right? So these are all URI-based attacks, and if you have a web app firewall in front of it, especially if it's on-prem, you have full control over it, or if it's something like a CDN, content delivery network, like a Cloudflare or an Akamai, where you can put these strings in there to specifically block those. You'll block those strings before they even hit the F5, and you're effectively mitigating your risk. So just something to consider, for anything that's publicly facing when these sorts of things come out. Another one is the Firefox RCE exploit that came out, I think it was the 2nd or 3rd of July, so it was a couple weeks ago at this point. But it is a pretty significant RCE exploit. There's a couple different pieces to it. I believe it did affect the Thunderbird mail component as well. But it's can be pretty significant, can enable drive-by downloads and some other exploits to be leveraged against it. So again, blocking these where possible, enhancing or tightening up your content filter and spam filters will help with mitigation practices for these. But if you can patch them as fast as possible, it's always obviously the best part. All right, so one more piece that I wanted to talk about related to ISAC. So this is the CIS malicious domain blocking and reporting service. So if any of you haven't heard about this, I would definitely encourage you to take a look at it. I'd say it's related to or very similar to the Cisco Umbrella or OpenDNS service, which I know a number of counties were either looking at or already taking advantage of. So the idea is you're redirecting all of your internal DNS out through CIS for filtering, which again, they're doing the same sort of things of adding known bad IPs and URLs to this, to their database, to their intelligence sets to help block these things right out of the gate. It is, I believe, is completely free to all the counties. You just have to be a member of ISAC, and you have to register yourself as well as provide all of the public IP addresses for your outbound internet traffic, so they can allow that into their DNS servers. So it should be a pretty straightforward cutover, for most organizations. Obviously, if you're using root hints for DNS internally today, step one is going to be converting that over to public forwarders already, and then you can move that to the CIS DNS servers for filtering. That should, ideally, if you haven't used these services in the past, there's a little workflow diagram here at the bottom, but the idea is that anything that's identified as a known bad URL or associated with a known bad IP address, when an endpoint tries to access that system, effectively they're Akamai DNS servers, but the reply is going to reply with a no listing response, meaning the endpoint is just not going to know where to go. So it's going to sinkhole that request. Doesn't answer the question of why they tried to go there in the first place, and that's always a good question to try and answer. And that's one where we leverage our SIEM and our firewall logs to try and find the answers to those. So if anyone's leveraging this and is looking for help, kind of chasing some of those, if you don't have a clear answer on why a system was trying to hit a known bad IP, that we can help with, we're always happy to do that as well. All right, so just wanted to add a few considerations for kind of general best practices before we open it up for questions, and kind of hopefully encourage everyone to ask some questions and kind of participate in discussion here as well. One of the things that got brought up last week as part of the ISAC EISAC quarterly meeting, but is really something that gets talked about all the time is patching. And how do we handle, how do we patch for critical systems? How do we handle non-Microsoft patching? How do we handle zero-day exploits or highly critical patches and getting those deployed? ISAC and CIS, they're recommending a less than 24-hour turnaround on critical ones, which in some cases, if they're public-facing, like the F5 one, is not necessarily. Sometimes you need to go faster than that. It can be really, really critical in some of these cases. So I know sometimes that's a difficult process to tackle, especially for the non-Microsoft ones, if you don't have the tool set that can handle non-Microsoft applications and patching those, and then obviously the testing that goes with that. But one thing we would suggest is picking subset of systems that might be a little bit more easily able to be patched, a little bit less susceptible to changes in the environment, and anything you can patch, even if it's not the whole environment, within that time frame to help reduce that surface area for risk is just going to put yourself in a better position. Another one is credential management. This has kind of been a big one that's been talked about as a best practice, as well as related to NIST guidelines and HIPAA and other compliance frameworks, but limiting admin accounts and the number of them that exist, whether they're domain admin or other. One of the big things, we come across regularly is environments where users insist on having to have an local admin account. And I know that's a tough environment to break, especially if that's a long established practice in a large environment. So one of the things that we suggest doing is if you have a lot of users that require to have local admin, create a separate admin account for them that only can be a domain account, but only has local admin to that system, so that they have to intentionally go and use their additional admin account to perform privilege escalated commands. And it could be something as simple as just updating a local piece of software that they're approved to do. But what that'll do is really force people to step back and think a little bit before they actually perform an administrative action. And that can really make a big difference in helping to cut down on malware and viruses in general, but just it helps get you to the status of best practice. And quite frankly is best practice, because now they're actually using an admin account for admin needs and using the regular account for day-to-day stuff. Another one that gets talked about quite a lot, but you can't understate it, is multi-factor authentication, at least for critical users, especially going into this election cycle, and making sure that multi-factor is enabled for email systems, for VPN users, and internal RDP if possible. We do typically suggest using a separately managed multi-factor system. There's a handful of them out there. The idea being is that if somebody is intentionally setting up additional multi-factor accounts and it has to be done through an admin, that there's a little bit more change control and process. The point there being that a lot of firewalls and VPN systems use self-registration for multi-factor, which is okay because it helps with the rollout of the service itself. But what that does, and in my example of our red team, is if somebody can create their own user account and self-enroll in their own multi-factor, our pen testers are adhering to the policies that were created, but they were still able to get in with their own multi-factor. So having multi-factor is great. If you can have a separately managed one that has a little bit more control, I definitely encourage you to do so there as well. Another big one that's come up a lot recently, we've had to actually address a number of times in the last couple of months, not necessarily within the scope of the BOE program, but is if you can, by all means, set up notifications to changes to your mailboxes in your environment. Maybe not everything, but at least pick some critical ones. Adding and changing routing rules on a mailbox, especially if it's sinkholing addresses going to or from a specific email address. It's always good to flag that sort of stuff. And that's a huge win if you can identify those, because a lot of times, and we've caught this, and this is specifically what we've been addressing is an attacker gets into a mailbox, sets up a routing rule to sinkhole replies from an account, and then starts sending requests for money or change this bank account number, change this routing number, when they know a payment is about to go out. And although maybe not directly related to elections going on right now for the payment type processes, but that's a very, very real scenario that we've been dealing with all too often. At the same time, other scenarios there is turning off remote access on mailboxes, or enabling admin validation before another device is approved. Disabling multi-factor is another one. If you're turning on multi-factor manually for a mailbox for everybody, if they have the permissions to turn it off, and they do so, that should be a big red flag. And a lot of systems, especially Office 365, has a lot of this stuff built in now where you can turn those on as a notification to the admins. Regarding the MFA, if you can administratively enable it globally, by all means, go for it. Or even if you can just do it for a subset of the environment, you'll still be much further ahead. Okay, and just a few more pieces here. Ransomware, I don't want to say has been beaten to death over the last couple of years, but sort of. Unfortunately, it is still the number one cybersecurity issue in the public sector across the globe. And that's coming from the Verizon report from this year. Statistically, it's pretty far ahead of everything else, including the email compromises that I was just speaking about before. Ransomware itself, and a lot of you may, feel you're comfortable with it in terms of having, adequate coverage from antivirus or other practices. The ransomware itself is certainly an issue if it's locking up resources. Obviously, people can't do their job. Going to the elections is certainly a concern for, the elections department, the BOE department. The other, significant part of that is that not so much the ransomware, but the fact that ransomware in a lot of cases really is leveraging the exact same exploits that a lot of other breaches do. So even though it may not be just ransomware, it may be an attacker actually trying to get in and just gain remote access. If it's successful, that's where we lean back on the SIEM to look for these behavioral analysis, because if they get in undetected through one of these same types of scenarios, drive-by exploits, a spear phishing attempt, any one of all sorts of different scenarios that attackers use, and including our pen testers use, we really got to pay attention to the changes in the environment afterwards. I just wanted to kind of tie that together, that ransomware is still a problem, but it's the underlying exploits and techniques that are being used that are still a wider problem that really apply to everybody. Obviously patching helps with this. That'll make a big difference. Limiting local admin accounts, obviously we already talked about that. That's a really significant one. If a user can't run administrative actions without being prompted or without thinking about it, then it's just gonna help them. And if they do use their admin account to actually run something without thinking about it, then they at least had to really try hard to make it happen. Some other ones, disabling PowerShell when possible for users. This can be done through group policy. You can enable it for all of your help desk and admin accounts still, so they can do what they need to do, especially if you're using PowerShell for a lot of administrative tasks remotely throughout the environment. But in a lot of cases, most users don't need to be running PowerShell, let alone a command prompt as well. You can disable both of those for most standard users. And that's the sort of thing where you can monitor the behavior of that as well. And that kind of comes back to this next piece of looking at endpoint capabilities. And I know we talked about this a couple webinars ago about some free tools out there for analyzing process trees and those sorts of things in a particular scenario. But looking at just evaluating your endpoint capabilities, and a lot of endpoint packages nowadays can shut down PowerShell, or at least analyze it and give you a report of who's running PowerShell, who's using it, and who shouldn't be. And that might help with some decisions around how you lock it down a little bit further. Some other of the more modern antivirus capabilities related specifically to ransomware are looking for things like high volume access to files, right? So most people using a file share are going to browse to their file share, open the 1 or 2 files that they need, and they're going to do their work. A lot of them, antivirus systems now, are looking for this high volume access, because unless you're your backup software, you're typically not going to access 3, 5, 10, 100 files within a couple minute window. And a lot of these just simple behavioral analysis are going to kill that process and flag it as shouldn't be there, and might help really prevent a significant issue. And then the last one, which I know has been a topic for a while, but it really can't hurt to talk about again, is network segmentation. And in my example, with our pen testers, more recently, that's very, very real. If an attacker or a pen tester can get in from the outside, where can they go next? And that's the big question you have to ask when you're talking about network segmentation, is if different subnets don't need to talk to each other, then they shouldn't, and we need to lock them down as much as possible. And in a lot of cases, if you can get it down very much to the port and protocol that should be running for that particular software, then you'll be in a much better spot. Here at Sedara, one of the things we try and talk about is the fact that DMZs don't really exist anymore. As a concept, they do, and you really want to be able to leverage those, but it's really still all about network segmentation and just locking down things as much as possible. So when we look at these types of scenarios, and this is really something to consider, a DMZ, for a public-facing server is one thing, but if you have multiple public-facing servers that don't need to talk to each other, they should also be segmented from each other. So now all of a sudden you call them a DMZ, but now you have 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. It doesn't have to be overly complex, but even if you're doing something as simple as splitting up your public-facing Linux with public-facing Windows, you're limiting your surface area for attack if someone were to hit those systems, because different credentials should be used for different systems, different exploits would be used for different operating systems, and there's just something to consider when you look at the network segmentation. Don't overcomplicate it, but it's definitely important concept to look at.